And everybody has the text, yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so as I mentioned in my email to you, there's not a lot of material. Also, because this particular, the way it's split up, this is a fairly short triennial, even though the parasha as a whole is not all that short. But I think it's interesting material, and hopefully we'll get something out of it. So let me.
Are you going to do share screen?
No, I wasn't planning to.
Okay, I can do it on my cell phone. I can.
All right.
I can get it.
I mean, you could also have it open in a separate window.
I could do that.
Yeah. Do you need me to?
No, it's okay. I'll just do it this way.
All right. I think if I share the screen, then we can't see each other, and I think part of it. I mean, I would do it if people didn't have the text available to them, but I prefer not to. I like us, and I think in general, I think we like to be able to see each other. So anyway, so here is the first Rashi. Im zevach shlamim korbano, im min habakar hu makriv, im zachar im nekeva, tamim yakrivenu lifnei Hashem. If his sacrifice is, I'm gonna not translate the word shlamim, but if his sacrifice is a shlamim, if he sacrifices it from the cattle, whether it's male or female, he shall it needs to be unblemished, and he shall bring it, offer it before Hashem. All right, so I mean, this word korban, yakriv, etc., it's also a little bit difficult to translate, because I mean, if you know the Hebrew, you get all of the senses of the word simultaneously. But the word korban, okay, which we translate as sacrifice, comes from the root kuf resh bet, karav, okay? And that means, like, if something is nearby, it's karov, right? But also my relatives are krovim, right? Because they're close to me, right? And so to a korban, so like lahakriv means both to sacrifice and to bring near. Okay, so again, it's translation is hard sometimes because words have more than one meaning, and that's intentional. Okay, so when it says yakrivenu lifnei Hashem, it means both he will sacrifice it before Hashem, but also he will bring it near to Hashem. Okay, so that's not a Rashi. That's just in general a comment on the word, because it's a word that appears a lot in Exodus. The word korban, the noun korban, and the verb lahakriv. Okay, Mike, yeah.
Yeah, so I have a question that it's my ignorance that's asking. It's undoubtedly, it's not the first time that this Rashi has bumped into this. It's the first time our class has, I think, but it's always bothered me. And I always wondered what people like Rashi would think of it. The idea of unblemished, and everybody's God's creatures, and here in the Torah we find this kind of pecking order or discrimination or whatever, and it may just be political correctness of the 20th and 21st century, but I just wondered if the sages or Rashi ever addressed that and had any thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, look, I mean, I think the prophets addressed it. Okay. I mean, and it's a great question, but I think it's more problematic in a different context, right? I mean, because for the Torah, animals are property,
Mhm.
right? They're simply property. I mean, in fact, in law, animals are property. I mean, we just bought health insurance for our dog, and it was a clear explanation if you read all the fine print. This is not health insurance. It's property insurance, right? Because animals are legally property, even though so and the prophets, many of the prophets complain that you're bringing blemished animals before God. Why? It's not that. I mean, the point is that if you are offering something to God, right, you shouldn't, cheap out, right, and say, well, I mean, this this lamb is injured anyway. It's probably gonna die before I can shear it. It's probably gonna die before I can slaughter it to eat it. So this one might as well be the one for the sacrifice, right? And I think that's it. That you don't want to give to God
Damaged goods.
the cheapest stuff that you would not miss much anyway, right? I mean, there's a reason why in English that has a connotation of a sacrifice. I'm not really sacrificing anything, or you should give to the point where it becomes a real sacrifice, right? Where I think your point is actually, to me at least, more troubling, is that the same thing that applies to sacrificial animals also applies to Kohanim,
Exactly. That was going to be my next
right?
question.
Right? That a Kohen who is deformed in some way cannot function as a Kohen, right? And that I think is more troubling. And anthropologists have given it their best shot.
Mhm.
Um, but it is in some way. I mean, it's a very primitive notion that the Kohen is in some way a stand-in for God, right? And as God is perfect, so the Kohen has to be perfect, right? I mean, because it's not only physically; it's also Kohen who is in a prohibited marriage, and there are so many degrees of prohibited marriages. I mean, as I mentioned, I don't remember when, but I remember, like, within recent memory. Oh, it was in the Who is a Jew class.
Mhm.
That from the perspective of Orthodoxy, I am a Kohen in a prohibited marriage because a Kohen is not allowed to marry a convert. Now, having said that, there is nothing in the Torah that says a Kohen may not marry a convert. Okay, it says a Kohen may not marry a zonah. Okay, zonah, which is, I mean, it's hard exactly to translate, but let's say a woman of low morals. Okay, so the rabbinic assumption is essentially, I mean, and I do not endorse this, I'm just explaining it. A Gentile woman is presumed to be a zonah. Okay, and even though we have this halachic statement, tinok ger ketinok shenolad domeh, that a convert is like a newborn baby, right? Your past doesn't carry with you. No, it does carry with you. Okay, and a Kohen can't marry a convert because she was a Gentile woman, and Gentile women are assumed to be zonot. Okay, and therefore a Kohen cannot marry a convert. Okay, now the assumption is offensive, right? The assumption is offensive, which is why we don't hold by it. An Orthodox rabbi would say, yes, the assumption is offensive, but we're powerless to change it, right? And that, I mean, that's a basic difference between Orthodox and conservative jurisprudence, is that normative orthodoxy feels unable to repeal even rabbinic enactments, right? Even if they don't make sense, even if they're offensive, what one generation of rabbis has legislated, another generation of rabbis is powerless to repeal. But we don't hold that way. Rashi wouldn't hold that way either. Rashi loves Kelly, so it's not an issue. Oh wait, that's a different
Kelly loves
Rashi.
Rashi.
What?
Kelly loves Rashi.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So back to the text. Okay, so I purposely didn't translate shlamim because it's right. We all know that root, shin lamed mem, right? I mean, it usually I talk about how the root kuf he lamed is in the name of our congregation, right? Kahal, kihila, but shalom, right? So, but shalem also means whole, right? Complete. Like we wish somebody a refuah shlema, right? A complete recovery. But it also means whole even in a physical sense, right? Like if I go to a falafel stand, tarotze chetzi or shalem, right? Do you want half a falafel or a whole falafel, right? I mean, right? A mana shlema is a full serving, a full, right? A whole falafel, right? So shalem has a lot of different meanings, and it's not really clear what it means. Now you might leap to the idea that it means a whole burnt offering, right? That it's burnt up whole, but it's not. Okay, that's an olah. An olah is an offering that's burnt whole. I mean, we have, I don't know. I suspect that many people have this idea that the biblical sacrifice is like you just threw a whole animal on you slaughtered it and then threw it on the altar and burned it up whole.
That's what I thought.
But for the most part, that wasn't true, as we're going to see with the shlamim. Okay, so it's not really clear what shlamim means. So Rashi says, Shemitilim shalom be'olam. It instills peace in the world. Davar acher, a different explanation. Shlamim sheyesh be'em shalom lamizbeach ulekohanim ulebe'alim. Okay, so that one is it has this kind of, so his first explanation is it has this kind of mystical or metaphysical effect on the world, right? That peace is instilled in the world by virtue of these sacrifices that Israel brings, right? But another explanation for Rashi is that it's actually a living embodiment of shalom because it's shared, right? I mean, some of it is burnt up on the altar, right? And some of it is given to the Kohen, and some of it is eaten by the person who brought the sacrifice, right? So it's shared, and that idea of sharing is a sort of representation or instantiation of the concept of shalom. Okay, so because that was, I mean, the main way that the Kohanim actually got paid was a chunk of the sacrifice went to them. Okay. Any questions or comments on that?
I had a,
Yeah, Toby, please.
I'm assuming it was the rabbis that made the determination that Gentile women were of low morality.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
No, absolutely. I mean, again, the Torah simply says a Kohen can't marry a Zonah, right? But it was the rabbis who determined that Gentile woman equals Zonah. All right, period. And look, I mean, in a way, you know, because you don't want to get into examining each woman's past, right? But you know, nevertheless, I mean, you know, some people think it's because Kelly was divorced, but halachically she wasn't divorced, because when she got married, right, she was a Gentile and her first husband was a Gentile, so that's, you know, non-existent. You know, but as a convert, so yeah, so that was a rabbinic determination. It's not a biblical law. You know, of course, you know, the rabbis who hold by that would say it's that when, right, I mean, this is one of the things, I mean, it becomes difficult sometimes to determine whether something is actually biblical or rabbinic, right? Because the prohibition on marrying a zonah is biblical, right? From our perspective, the identification of a convert with a zonah is rabbinic, right? But halachically, it's not. I mean, halachically, it's right. It's part of the definition of the word, right? Okay, so next Rashi. V'hiktiru oto v'nei Aharon hamizbecha al ha'olah asher al ha'itzim asher al ha'esh ishay reach nichoach lashem. Aaron's descendants shall turn it into smoke on the altar. Al, and I'm not going to translate the word al either. Al, the burnt offering, which is al, the wood, which is al, the fire, a fire offering with a pleasant smell to Hashem. Okay, so the issue is, what does this word al mean, right? I mean, again, we have a kosher restaurant in our area called Al Ha'esh.
Yeah.
Right? Al Ha'esh means on the fire, right? Which is the modern Hebrew term for barbecue, right? What are you gonna have?
Yeah.
Right? What are you having for dinner? Al Ha'esh. Doesn't mean they're going to the restaurant formerly known as Modi's, right? It means we're cooking out in the backyard. But for example, the airline El Al, right? I mean, it's poetic, but the term El Al literally means upwards. El means to, Al means up. El Al means upwards. Okay, and it's the same root, like when you come up to say the blessing before the Torah reading, it's an aliyah, right? It's the same root because you're going up to the Torah, right? So the question is, in this context, what does the word al mean? Okay, and Rashi says two things. Milvad ha'olah lamadnu shetakdim olat tamid l'chol korban al ha'me'aracha. Okay, so he first says that the word al ha'olah means in addition to the burnt offering. Okay, the olah is the daily sacrifice. Okay, and by daily we mean daily, right? The olah was offered on Shabbat. The olah was offered, whatever day of the year the olah was offered. Okay, now this of course gets into the fact. I mean, you asked a question. I don't remember if it was on Shabbat, Mike, but you asked a question about a certain practice, right? And I said, you all have already heard me say there are certain things we don't do because they did them in the temple, and there are certain things we do because they did them in the temple, right? But one of the things that they did in the temple that we don't do is light a fire and burn things, right? Because they did the olah even on Shabbat, even on Hag, even on Yom Kippur.
Yeah, but it's
right?
the same way that you work on Saturday leading services.
No, it's different. I appreciate the analogy, but that's not it. That's not it, because leading service, I mean, yes, it's my profession, right? But there's no milaha involved, right? I'm not, see, this is a problem when you think in English. No, it is. If you think in English, right? Being a rabbi is my job. I get paid for it. Therefore, it's work, right? But work is not a Hebrew word, right? The word is milaha, right? And of course, now it gets into a tautology, right? Because what is a milaha? A milaha is something that you're not allowed to do on Shabbat, right? What are you not allowed to do on Shabbat? Milachot, which are things that you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. Right? But there's no milaha. I mean, leaving aside the question of running the Zoom, okay,
Yeah,
which
no. That's
as far as I'm concerned, is not milaha. Some of my conservative colleagues think it is, and all of my Orthodox colleagues think it is, right? But I hold that it's not milaha. But giving a drasha is not milaha, right?
but there's like 37 examples of what is work prohibited on Shabbos.
Right.
Yeah, it's 39.
39, whatever.
Right.
And you're saying that not one of them is something you get paid to do that doesn't require heavy lifting.
Right. I mean, because, right, where does the concept of the categories of forbidden labor, which are called avot melacha, right? Where do we derive the 39 avot melacha? Okay, Gail.
It's from what you're doing when you build the temple or.
Exactly, right? Because you've got this whole long explanation of everything that was involved in building the tabernacle, right? And then in Mitten Derinnen, it says, Ach et Shabtotai tishmoro, right? Nevertheless, you shall observe my Shabbatot, right? So the idea is do all these things, but not on Shabbat, right? Why? Because they're right. So that essentially, in theory, anything that was necessary to construct the tabernacle is a forbidden activity on Shabbat. Okay, giving a drasha was not necessary to build the tabernacle. Calling page numbers was not necessary to build the tabernacle, right? Resolving a conflict about who gets what aliyah when is not right. So nothing that a rabbi does. Now, when you're a Hillel director, that's different, because Hillel directors primarily get paid for moving furniture. Everything else they do for free. But
Well, it depends on where you move it.
no, I agree. I mean, moving furniture inside a building is not a melacha, right? I mean, and so this is why you cannot think in terms of the word work, right? Because moving my sofa inside my house is not melacha, right? Carrying a feather across the street is melacha, right? Which is more work, moving a sofa or moving a feather, right? But that's not the point. It's not, because it's not, the category is not work, it's melacha, right? I mean, this is why caterers, right? You have kosher caterers work on Shabbat, right? I mean, they don't cook on Shabbat, but they reheat on Shabbat. You can have Jewish workers working, on a buffet or even table service on Shabbat, because they're not milachot. Okay, now, I mean, you can approach it however you want. You can say, oh, this is all just, casuistry that, allows people to do what they want to do anyway. But it's not, it's not Melcha. Now, having said that, I mean, certainly from my perspective, I mean, I ask myself this question, okay? If I won the lottery and no longer needed to draw a salary, would I still do this? And the answer is, yeah, I would. I actually would. I mean, there are probably certain things I wouldn't do. I probably do minyan less often. Okay, but other than that, if I didn't need to draw a salary, I would still do this. Okay, I don't think a banquet waiter would answer the same way. But in neither case is it melacha, because again, it's not, the word is not work. Word is not work. Okay, but so anyway, so the word is al, but Rashi. So one of the things that Rashi is saying is that al, he's reading al as in addition to. Okay, and that, I mean, clearly when, like, for example, the maftir that we read on Rosh Hashanah, which talks about the sacrifice, right? Olat Shabbat b'Shabbato al olat hatamid v'nischa, right? The Shabbat offering al olat hatamid, in addition to the olat hatamid, the daily or the perpetual sacrifice, right? There, the word al definitely means in addition to, right? Definitely means in addition to, but Rashi is also reading it that al is also like a geographical concept, right? The ola, the shalem is on top of the daily sacrifice, right? The shalem is on top of the daily sacrifice, which is on top of the wood, which, I'm sorry, yes, which, yeah, the shlamim is on top of the daily sacrifice, which is on top of the wood, which is on top of the altar, right? So, he's reading al in a very literal sense as well. Okay. Any questions on that? All right. Next comment. V'hiktiro hakohen hamizbecha lechem ishe ladonai. The kohen shall cause it to go up in smoke on the altar or in the direction of the altar. Lechem ishe ladonai. Okay, I'm not going to translate this at all, okay, because this is what Rashi is trying to do, right? I mean, you know the word lechem, right? Or you think you know the word lechem, right? What does the word lechem mean?
Right.
Bread. But it doesn't mean bread.
Not
It
here.
means food, right? It means food. And interestingly enough, the same root, right? I mean, we have a town, Bethlehem, right? Bethlehem is Beit Lechem, which in Hebrew means house of bread. Okay. Interestingly, in Arabic, this very same word, lahm, doesn't mean bread, it means meat. Okay. Now, what that means is that they both go back to a common Proto-Semitic root that simply means food. Right? And for the Jews, that root that simply meant food ultimately takes on the meaning of bread. And for the Arabs, it takes on the meaning of meat. Okay. But so when we say hamotzi lechem min haaretz, it really originally meant food, right? But for whatever reason, in Jewish culture, the basic food was bread. Okay. And I clearly remember having a discussion with a Chinese from mainland China, from the PRC, Chinese graduate student who was studying Jewish studies, and he had trouble with the idea, why is bread in a different status than everything else, right? Because bread, right, takes its own, right, it's hamotzi lechem min haaretz, right? Anything else in the world that you eat is not hamotzi lechem min haaretz, right? It's shehakol, or it's mizonot, it's pri ha'etz, it's pri ha'gafin, it's pri ha'adamah, right? But it's not lechem. And that was a hard concept for him to understand why. And I said to him, think of it in terms of rice. Oh, yeah. Now I understand, right? Because for him, right now, if he was from northern China, it might have been different because, their wheat is a staple crop, right? But in most of China, it's rice. In the same way that in most of Mexico, it's corn, right? So every culture has its own sort of basic staple food. But for us, that basic staple food is bread. Okay. But so lechem ishe, so that we have the word lechem, and then we had the word ishe, which is from the word esh, fire, right? So, but lechem ishe leHashem, what does that mean? Here's what, all right, ma kashela Rashi, what's Rashi's problem? Okay, Rashi, what is Rashi's problem here? I mean, it's a problem that I think a lot of people have with the whole concept of sacrifices, of burnt offering, right? You're feeding God, right? You're feeding God like God eats, right? Rashi is explaining here, no, it's not that God eats. The lechem is not the lechem for God. It's the lechem of the fire, okay, in the name of God, meaning that it's fuel for the fire, right? That it's not that you're feeding God with this offering. You're feeding the fire, okay, and it's fuel for the fire, and the fire is for God, not in the sense that God needs fire, right? If God doesn't need food, God doesn't need fire, but it's consecrated to God. Okay, now, look, I have to say, anthropologically, Rashi is probably wrong. I mean, I suspect that at its earliest level, the people did believe that they were feeding God. But Rashi is, more than 2,000 years after this, and doesn't believe that we're feeding God, and doesn't want you to believe that we're feeding God. Okay, and so the next Rashi on the same verse, lechem lashon ma'achal. Okay, it means food in general, not only bread. And he brings a number of different biblical verses where the word lechem clearly doesn't mean bread; it means food in general. And, like, for example, the Haftorah that we read from Mahar Chodesh, right? Mahar Chodesh, when David doesn't come to the banquet and Saul is upset, right? What does he say? Madua lova ben Yishai al halachem gam I forget whether gam hayom gam etmol or gam etmol gam shoshom, right? But why did the son of Jesse not come to the lechem, right? Clearly, and I just realized that maybe there's even a pun here, because why didn't he come to the lechem? Doesn't mean why didn't he come to the bread, right? Why didn't he come to the banquet, right? And then Jonathan says, because he asked to go to Beit Lechem, right? Because Zevach Mishpacha Lanu Beveit Lachem. We have a family sacrifice in Beit Lechem. So he couldn't come to your Lechem because he had to go to his family's in Beit Lechem, right? I actually didn't realize it until just now, but I think that's actually a pun. But so, Rashi's giving examples of where the word lechem doesn't mean bread, it simply means food. Okay, and therefore food is fuel. So he's justifying his previous answer that the lechem is not food for God, it's food for the fire. Okay. Okay, I'm going to skip the next one because it's less interesting to me anyway. So let's look at 4:13. Now here we're going from shlamim to hatat. Okay, and my drasha on Shabbat is going to be about hatat also, but a hatat is generally translated as a sin offering. Okay, we know that, like, from the word chet, right? Al chet shechatanu, slach lanu avinu ki chatanu, right? But a hatat is only offered for an unintentional transgression. Okay, I'll give you an example. Okay, I'll give you an example. It's the week before Pesach. You went out, you bought your frozen vegetables that you're going to eat during Pesach, and you know that frozen vegetables bought before Pesach are perfectly fine. They don't need to say kosher for Pesach as long as you buy them before Pesach. And now it's Pesach, and you open up your bag of frozen broccoli, and Gewalt, there's pasta in with the broccoli.
Hey, that.
right? Could happen, right? It could happen, right? Because you now buy all of these mixtures that have pasta in it, right? Italian festival vegetables with pasta, da 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 da, and they didn't clean the machine well enough, and there's a piece of pasta in your broccoli, right? That's shogeg, right? That's you didn't go out and buy broccoli with pasta, right? You didn't even buy it during Pesach, when we could say, well, you didn't read the rabbi's message and it clearly says buy it before Pesach. You bought it before Pesach, right? You did everything that you were supposed to do, and nevertheless, you committed a transgression. Did not intend to, but somehow that transgression has disturbed the balance and it needs to be repaired. Okay, and therefore you bring a hatat. Okay, so that's what a hatat is. So now in 413, the im kol adat Yisrael yishgu, if the whole community of Israel sins or errs, makes a mistake, v'ne'alam davar me'einei kahal, because a matter was hidden from the eyes of the community, va'asu achat michol mitzvot Hashem asher lo ta'asenu ve'ashamnu, and they commit, right, literally, va'asu achat mikol mitzvot, they did one of the commandments of Hashem, but they didn't actually, right? I mean, but Hebrew works differently. They didn't fulfill one of the commandments of Hashem, which should not be done, and therefore they incurred guilt, right? So how can we say the whole community sinned, right? The whole community sinned and they didn't know. What does that mean, right? So that's what Rashi's trying to explain. It says Adat Yisrael Ele Sanhedrin, right? If the community of Israel sins, that means the Sanhedrin. Okay, the Sanhedrin. Now, let me let you in on a secret. In the original biblical context, it could not possibly have meant the Sanhedrin, right? Because the Sanhedrin didn't exist, right? And furthermore, the Sanhedrin couldn't possibly have existed because, look at the word Sanhedrin, right? It's not even Hebrew, it's Greek. It's Greek. And the Israelites in the Bible didn't know Greek, right? But by the time of the Second Temple, they definitely knew Greek, right? Because they had to know Greek because the rulers were Greek, right? So, but that's what Rashi says. It means the Sanhedrin. So if the Sanhedrin makes a mistake, v'ne'elam davar, it was hidden. Ta'u laharot b'achat mikol kritot shebetorah shehu mutar. Okay, so basically, the Sanhedrin made a mistake, and therefore the congregation was acting according to the instruction of the Sanhedrin, but the Sanhedrin ruled in error. Okay, the Sanhedrin ruled in error, right? And therefore, the whole congregation the whole community did something wrong, and somehow, so now, like, there's a disturbance in the force, right? And this disturbance in the force needs to be repaired, right? I mean, I don't know that we have this really now, right? I mean, I'm the rabbi, and if you ask me for a psak, for a ruling, and I make a mistake, right, and you follow it anyway, you're in the clear, right?
Mhm.
You're in the clear. The responsibility is on me, right? But we don't have a temple, we don't have sacrifices, so there's no, there's no need to bring an a sham. Now, whether people would have felt, or whether people would feel differently now, I don't know. I mean, I know there are people who might, let me say, every once in a while you have a kashrut scandal, right? Where a restaurant that's under supervision gets caught serving treif meat, right? I mean, here in Washington in the 90s, some of you may remember the Great Peking duck scandal,
Mhm.
right? The Great Peking duck scandal. But there have been instances where very frum butcher shops under very frum hashgacha have been secretly buying cheaper treif meat and passing it off as kosher and so on and so forth. Now, I'm sure that when people find out, they feel guilty and they need to do something. Now, having said that, depending on the circumstances, they may have to kosher stuff, right? They may have to kosher stuff, but usually not, okay? Usually not, because of the principle of rove, right? I mean, in other words, whatever, it's too complicated to get into now. And it has a question, you can ask it as a question. But I want to go on to the next Rashi, because I think it's really interesting. Okay, so it's 422, but what you need to know is that so these are all cases. If this person does that, this is what he does. If this person does that, this is what he does. And it's always im yechta, im, so on and so forth. Im means if, okay? If. But now we get to the leader, right? The word nasi, okay? Now, which incidentally, in modern Hebrew, the word nasi means president. Okay, but clearly it didn't mean right when we talk about Yehuda Hanasi, right? Doesn't mean Yehuda the president, right? It means the chief, right? And it comes from the root naso, to lift up, right? That this person is sort of exalted, lifted up, right? But in modern Hebrew, it means nasi, right? It means president, right? So Reuven Rivlin, who's the president of Israel's Hanasi Rivlin, right? And the previous guy was Hanasi Trump, and now we have Hanasi Biden, right? But anyway, so when the Nasi sins, but look at the word, it says asher, right? It doesn't say im, it says asher, okay? Not if the leader sins, but when the leader sins, right? So this is a bad translation, actually, right? This is a bad translation. Let me look at 422 in the Eitz Chaim. Let's see what it says. In case it is a chieftain who incurs guilt, okay? Whereas before it does say if for im, but for asher it is in case, okay? In case, but it also can, I think, legitimately mean when, okay? Although this is not really how Rashi reads it. Rashi reads this entirely homiletically, okay? Entirely homiletically. Asher nasi yechta. All right, so so the translator asked the question, why doesn't it say im like it does in verse 3 and verse 13? The answer is that asher means ashrei, okay? Like ashrei yoshvei vetecha, right? Ashrei means, we usually translate it as happy, but it could also be translated as blessed, right? Like if you look at the Beatitudes, right, that Jesus spoke, blessed are the peacemakers, right? Now remember, he was Jewish, and even though we don't have the Hebrew original, right? Blessed are the peacemakers is certainly Ashrei Rodfei Shalom or Ashrei Osei Shalom, right? But Ashrei, blessed are is Ashrei, right? So what does Rashi say? Ashrei Hador Shahanasi Shalom Noten Lev. Blessed is the generation whose leader pays attention, Lahavi Kapara Al Shgagato, to bring a sin offering for his unintentional sin. Kal v'homer, remember we've spoken about Kal v'homer, right? If he does this, then surely he'll do that, right? So Kal v'homer al shgagato, right? Yeah, Kal v'homer shemitcharet al zdenotav, right? So blessed is the right? Because we're talking about hatat. Hatat means an offering that you bring when you make a mistake, right? So basically, Ashrei Hador, blessed is the generation whose leader is willing to admit that he made a mistake, right? So clearly not referring to the previous guy, and clearly, frankly, not referring to the current governor of Maryland either. But Ashrei, right? That a generation whose leader is willing to acknowledge that he made a mistake is a blessed generation, right? Because if he'll acknowledge that he made a mistake, that he did something wrong unintentionally, right? My intentions were pure, but it turned out to be a mistake, right? My intentions were good, right? I really meant the best. I meant to do the right thing, but it didn't turn out well, right? And if he's willing to take responsibility for that, all the more so will he take responsibility for things that he does intentionally, right? That, in other words, that a leader who's willing to acknowledge error, blessed is that generation, right? So now, is that what it means? It's not what it means, right? I mean, it could be just a difference in language, although I think that the Torah has something in mind, right? And I actually read it as that anybody who exercises leadership is going to screw up every now and then. That's just the nature of the beast, right? Because leadership by its nature, if you're really going to be a leader, it means taking a risk, right? And if you take a risk, right, you're sometimes going to screw up. If you want to make sure that you never screw up, then don't take a risk. But if you don't take a risk, you're not a leader, right? So that's the conundrum. But that's not how Rashi reads it. He reads this entirely homiletically as Asher means Ashrei. Okay, that generation is blessed because its leadership is willing to acknowledge a mistake. And I will tell you, if I ever made a mistake, I would certainly acknowledge it. Right. Sorry, I guess that joke fell a little bit flat.
Don't tell Kelly that.
Any questions or comments on this? All right.
Okay.
So there's one more. All right. All right. So, O hoda alav chatato asher chata ba, or the sin that he committed was made known to him. Vehevi et korbano, he should bring for a sacrifice seir ezim zachar tamim, an unblemished male goat. Okay, kamo im hoda harbe or yesh. All right, so here it does have the word. It has the word or, but the word or can also mean if. Okay, and again, he brings a lot of other biblical verses where the word "o" means if, not or. Okay, but the next one is the more significant one. Hoda alav kshechata haya savur shehu heter ulachar mikan noda lo sheisur haya. All right, it became known to him when he committed the sin, he thought it was permissible, but afterwards it became known to him that it was forbidden, right? That's a genuine, right? That's what a hatat is for, right? I thought it was allowed, right? I thought it was allowed, but it turns out that it wasn't. Now you have to really think it was allowed, right? Not, well, had I known that this was frowned upon, I wouldn't have done it, right? Had I known that societal norms would change, no, that's not what it means, right? We're really talking about like, something I thought was permitted, but turned out to be forbidden, right? I mean, and there are things. I mean, people, have mistaken ideas about what the halacha is all the time. Although, in my experience, it tends more towards people thinking that things are forbidden when they're actually permitted, rather than thinking that things are permitted when they're actually forbidden. But it could happen. It could happen. It could certainly happen either way. All right. Questions, comments?
Very nice. Thank
Right,
you.
thank you. Good Shabbos.
Good.
Good
Back
job,
to
good job, thank you.
You and a sweet and kosher Pesach.
And to you and yours.
Thanks.
Yes.
All right. See
You
y'all
leaving
later.
for Chicago?
Huh?
Marcy,
Yeah,
you going to Chicago?
no.
Oh, you didn't go last year.